So Phase 4, I want to talk about Phase 4 for a while tonight. Not in a let's dissect what went wrong kind of way, more in the way you'd revisit something you thought you understood at the time, and then realise, sitting with it quietly, that you'd actually missed quite a lot of what it was doing. Because here's the thing, when Phase 4 was airing and releasing, roughly 2021 through to 2023, the general consensus, and I think this is fair to say, was that it felt a bit scattered. A bit like someone had tipped a box of interesting ideas onto a table and said, right, there you go. WandaVision, Loki, No Way Home, Multiverse of Madness, Eternals, Ms. Marvel, She-Hulk, Moon Knight. It was a lot. It was genuinely a lot. And the connective tissue wasn't always obvious. People complained, quite reasonably, that it didn't feel like it was building toward anything with the same clarity that Phases 1 through 3 had. And I think that criticism was understandable at the time. But we're not at the time anymore. We're sitting here, well after the fact, knowing that Avengers Doomsday is arriving in December 2026, with Robert Downey Jr. returning not as Tony Stark, but as Doctor Doom, with 3 universes colliding, with the Fantastic Four and the X-Men thrown into the same story as the characters we've been watching for 15-odd years. And from this vantage point, Phase 4 looks different, genuinely different. It looks, if I'm being honest, almost deliberate, not deliberately messy. I don't want to over-romanticize the production chaos that was clearly happening behind the scenes during those years. There were genuine wobbles. There were shows that didn't quite land. There was the whole Kang situation, which we'll get into, because it actually matters a lot to this story. But underneath all of that, the thematic and structural foundations that Doctor Doom needs in order to exist as a coherent villain, the branched multiverse, the concept of incursions, the Darkhold corrupting chaos magic, the Fantastic Four crossing universes, the TVA's collapse. All of that was quietly laid down across Phase 4, in piece after piece, sometimes clumsily, sometimes brilliantly, but there. And that's what tonight is about, really. Just tracing that thread, taking our time with it. There's no rush here. Each section is its own little room. You don't have to follow every beat to get something out of it. If you've seen all of Phase 4, some of this will be familiar territory, and hopefully a different angle on it. If you've seen some of it, you'll probably fill in enough gaps to follow along comfortably. If you're here mostly for the company of someone talking quietly about Marvel, at whatever hour this is, that's completely valid and genuinely appreciated. Now, before we get into it, if you enjoy this kind of slow, unhurried, go down the rabbit hole content, subscribing is always a kind thing to do. It helps more than you'd think, but no pressure. You're already here, and that's what matters. One more thing worth saying up front, just to frame where we're going. Doctor Doom, in the comics, is not merely a villain. He's not someone with a grudge or a traumatic backstory, or a plan to destroy a specific city. He's a civilizational scale threat. A man who, in one of Marvel's most famous comic runs, literally took the power of 2 cosmic entities and rebuilt the entire multiverse to his own specifications. That's the ceiling on Victor Von Doom as a character. And the reason Phase 4 needed to lay the groundwork it did is because a villain at that scale doesn't make sense unless the audience already understands, at a gut level, what the multiverse is, how it breaks, how it bleeds, what it looks like when 2 realities are on a collision course. Phase 4 is, in effect, the long course in how the multiverse breaks. And Doomsday is what follows when someone arrives who has studied that breakage very carefully and has plans for it. So, let's start at the beginning, or at least at what I think is the real beginning. A bureaucratic office at the end of time, staffed by people who have no idea they're not actually people, run by a man in a purple suit who has been lying to everyone, including himself, for a very long time. The Time Variance Authority is one of the stranger pieces of world-building Marvel has ever committed to, and I mean that as a genuine compliment. On the surface, the TVA looks like a government office, grey walls, filing cabinets, long queues, a cartoon mascot called Miss Minutes, who delivers orientation videos in an aggressively cheerful southern drawl. It's deliberately mundane, bureaucratic, almost to the point of parody. And that's entirely intentional, because the TVA's whole function is to make the infinite feel manageable. To make the concept of infinite branching timelines feel like something that can be processed with a stamp and a form in triplicate. When Loki, the variant who escaped with the Tesseract during the Endgame time heist, is brought before the TVA, he's told, essentially, that free will is an illusion, that there is one sacred timeline and every deviation from it is pruned, deleted, and the people doing the pruning are variants themselves, real humans and other beings whose original timelines were wiped and who were reshaped into TVA workers. Their memories gone, their former lives erased. They don't know this, of course. That's the point. Loki being Loki does not take this well. But before we get to what Loki does about it, I want to dwell for a moment on the TVA workers themselves, because they're doing something quietly important. These aren't faceless bureaucrats in the way that sci-fi normally uses faceless bureaucrats. The show gives them personalities, opinions, the particular kind of workplace humour that develops in institutions where everyone has long since made their peace with the absurdity of their job. Hunter B-15 is sharp and rigid, and then gradually isn't. Casey the archivist has never seen a fish. Mobius, of course, is Mobius. Someone who has clearly found a way to be genuinely good at his work and genuinely kind to the people around him inside a system that was designed to strip both those qualities out. There's something about the TVA as workplace that functions as a sideways commentary on how large systems work in general. Most of the people inside the TVA believe completely in what they're doing. They haven't been lied to, exactly. They've just been kept in a very specific kind of ignorance. The system functions because the people inside it do their jobs without asking questions that the system doesn't want them to ask. Which is, I think, a fairly precise description of how most institutions sustain themselves. Not through active deception at every level, but through the shaping of what questions feel available to ask. When Loki and Sylvie start asking those questions, when they start pulling on the thread of where the TVA's workers actually came from, who they were before, the whole structure begins to tremble, and the show's emotional intelligence is in recognizing that this is not a simple liberation narrative. Being told that everything you believed about your own existence is false is not, for most people, straightforwardly liberating. It's horrifying. Hunter B-15's response to discovering her real identity, a doctor, somewhere before the TVA took her, is one of the show's most quietly devastating moments. But here's the thing about Season 1 of Loki that I think gets undersold in retrospect. The show isn't really about Loki's ego, even though that's the texture of it. It's about a very specific philosophical question. Is a controlled, limited, tyrannically managed existence preferable to chaotic freedom? He who remains, the man behind the TVA, hiding at the Citadel at the end of time in what can only be described as a museum of his own ego, has decided that the answer is yes. Definitively, yes. Because the alternative, he explains, is a multiversal war. And his reasoning isn't stupid. He who remains, played by Jonathan Majors, and it remains one of the most charming villain performances in recent memory, even knowing everything that happened off screen, tells Loki and Sylvie the whole story in the Season 1 finale. He was a 31st century scientist named Nathaniel Richards who discovered the existence of parallel universes, and so did his variants. And those variants, rather than sharing the discovery, decided to wage war over it. Timeline after timeline consumed by conflict between versions of the same man. He survived, found a creature called Alioth that could consume time itself, used it to end the war, and then collapsed all of reality into one protected thread. The sacred timeline. He did it, he insists, to stop something worse. Now, whether that's true is actually left a bit ambiguous by the show, and I appreciate that. He Who Remains is very clearly manipulative, very clearly has been lying to his TVA workers for who knows how long, and has a theatrical quality that makes you wonder how much of his benevolent dictator framing is genuine and how much is performance. Loki isn't sure. Sylvie definitely isn't, and so Sylvie kills him. She drives a knife into his chest at the end of the universe because her entire life has been defined by running from the TVA that erased her, and she is not interested in the nuanced argument he's making about why controlled tyranny beats chaos. She kills him, and the multiverse branches. You see it happen in real time. On a screen showing the timeline, the single thread fractures into hundreds of thousands of smaller threads all at once, spreading out in every direction. It's a beautiful visual, actually, and an enormously consequential one. Because here's what that moment means, structurally, for everything that follows. Before Sylvie kills He Who Remains, the sacred timeline is the only timeline. There is one Earth, one history, one set of outcomes. After she kills him, every version of every event that ever happened, or could ever happen, begins to exist simultaneously. Every variant of every hero and villain. Every alternate history, every different version of Earth, with slightly or dramatically different physics, cultures, outcomes, all of it at once. That is the thing. Avengers, Doomsday requires in order to exist. It requires that the multiverse be real, accessible, and fractured enough that three separate universes could physically collide. That heroes from completely different realities could occupy the same story. That someone like Doctor Doom, who in the comics understands multiversal architecture better than almost anyone, could find the cracks and use them. Loki Season 1 is the event that makes all of that possible. Not just narratively, structurally. And there's one more idea I want to linger on before the big pivot, which is the TVA workers themselves and what they represent. These are people who are taken from their real lives, lives they're not even aware of, and put to work maintaining someone else's idea of order. When Loki and Mobius start pulling that thread and discovering what the TVA actually is, the horror of it isn't just the scale, it's the intimacy. Real people with real histories used as instruments. That idea of people's identities and realities being overwritten or controlled runs through a surprising amount of Phase 4. WandaVision does something similar with the residents of Westview. The Darkhold does it to Wanda herself. The concept of dream walking, which we'll get to in Doctor Strange 2, takes it even further. Phase 4 keeps returning to this question of what happens when a sufficiently powerful being decides they have the right to rewrite someone else's reality. And the answer, every time, is that it leaves damage behind, even when the being in question had good intentions. He Who Remains had good intentions, or says he did. The TVA was built on them, and the wreckage of those good intentions is a fully branched, unguarded, destabilized multiverse, which brings us, eventually, to Loki Season 2. But that's its own section, because it needs it. For now, the point is simply this. That moment where Sylvie drives the knife home is probably the single most structurally significant act in all of Phase 4. It's the domino. Everything else follows from it. One other detail I want to mention before moving on, which is the character of Mobius. Agent Mobius, played by Owen Wilson, who brings a kind of wry, genuinely warm energy to a show full of gods and time bureaucrats. Mobius has no special powers. He rides a jet ski in his heart, apparently. But he's the one who treats Loki like a person before Loki has given anyone reason to. And that relationship, two very different beings finding something like genuine friendship at the end of time, is the emotional core of Season 1 in a way that makes the structural stuff land. The best Phase 4 content works like that. The big mythological ideas need a human scale underneath them, or they're just noise. Loki mostly gets that balance right. And talking about getting the balance right, or getting it gloriously, chaotically wrong in the most interesting possible way, brings us to a small town in New Jersey called Westview, and a woman who accidentally turned her grief into a television show. WandaVision is, I think, the most genuinely surprising piece of content in Phase 4. And I say that as someone who watched it air week by week, which was a specific experience that I don't think people who binged it afterward quite got in the same way. Because for the first few episodes, it really did feel like a very strange, very committed bit. A superhero show structured as a series of classic American sitcoms, complete with era-accurate aspect ratios and laugh tracks. Wanda and Vision, in black and white, struggling to hide their powers at a dinner party in the style of a 1950s comedy. Then Technicolor 1960s, then 1970s, then 1980s. The show just kept doing the bit, and the bit was good. It was well observed, it was funny, and there was this persistent undercurrent of wrongness that made it genuinely unsettling to watch even before you understood what was happening. The reveal, when it comes, is both simpler and more disturbing than most theories predicted. There is no external villain pulling Wanda's strings. Not really. Wanda did this herself. In the aftermath of losing Vision, who died twice in Infinity War, the second time at her own hand, trying to stop Thanos from getting the Mind Stone, and then had that sacrifice undone immediately when Thanos reversed time and took the stone anyway. Wanda arrived in Westview, New Jersey, because that's where Vision had bought them a house. He'd bought it before he died, as a kind of gesture toward a future they might have. And she found the empty lot and she just broke. And chaos magic, it turns out, responds to that. Chaos magic in the MCU is presented as something fundamentally different from what Doctor Strange does, or what Agatha Harkness does. Strange's sorcery is learned, structured, disciplined, grounded in ancient texts and training and tools. Chaos magic is innate to Wanda, in a way that goes deeper than her Hydra experiments, though those unlocked something that was already there. It's described by Agatha as something that rewrites the rules of what is possible, not just manipulating energy, but rewriting the underlying logic of reality itself. And Wanda, in her grief, unconsciously wrapped an entire New Jersey town in her chaos magic and bent it to the shape of her comfort. The residents of Westview, real people with real lives, became unwilling cast members in her sitcom, forced to play roles, aware somewhere underneath that something was deeply wrong, unable to leave or deviate from the script she'd written for them. Now, I want to be careful here because it's easy to either over-condemn Wanda or over-excuse her, and the show itself doesn't really do either. It holds both things at once. This was an act of enormous harm, and it was also an act of profound, unbearable grief. Monica Rambeau, who enters Westview as an agent trying to investigate the anomaly, comes out understanding Wanda in a way that most of the other characters don't. She sees the pain first and the harm second, not because the harm doesn't matter, but because understanding the pain is the only way to actually help. But here's what WandaVision establishes that matters so much for everything that comes after. 1. Chaos magic is real. It's different from other kinds of magic, and it operates at a scale that bends reality rather than just manipulating energy. The hex over Westview is a bubble of rewritten physics. That's not a spell. That's closer to a localized incursion. One person's internal reality exerting itself over an external one. 2. The Darkhold. The Darkhold is introduced in WandaVision's finale when Agatha Harkness reveals that there is a prophecy about the Scarlet Witch, a being of chaos magic so powerful that she's supposed to be capable of spontaneous creation and, crucially, total annihilation. And in the post-credits scene, we see Wanda sitting quietly in a cabin somewhere remote, seemingly at peace, while her astral form is inside studying the Darkhold. The Darkhold is a book of dark magic, millennia old, supposedly written by an elder demon, and the show plants this seed very quietly. The book doesn't just teach you things, it gets into you, it shapes your desires, it amplifies your worst impulses, while convincing you they're your truest ones. This is the piece of Phase 4's setup that I find most interesting in retrospect, because the Darkhold is the thing that bridges WandaVision and Doctor Strange in the multiverse of madness, but it also represents something larger. It's the idea that the tools of multiversal power are inherently corrupting, that you cannot interact with reality-bending forces without being changed by them. He who remains was changed by the knowledge of the multiverse. The Ancient One was changed, corrupted, technically, by the dark dimension's power, which she used to extend her life. Doctor Strange himself is changed by dreamwalking, and Wanda is changed, devastatingly, by the Darkhold. Phase 4 is really quite consistent on this point. The multiverse isn't just dangerous because of the things you can encounter in it, it's dangerous because of what it does to the people who try to navigate it. 3, and this one is easy to miss, WandaVision establishes exactly how powerful Wanda is. By the show's finale, she has fought Agatha Harkness, a witch of centuries of experience, to a standstill and won. She has absorbed and redirected enough magical energy to make Agatha, a practitioner who feeds on other witches' power, genuinely afraid. And she's done all of this while simultaneously maintaining a reality warping field over an entire town, while also processing an emotional breakdown, while also discovering mid-fight what she actually is. The Scarlet Witch as an entity is eventually described in Multiverse of Madness as more powerful than the Sorcerer Supreme, and you need WandaVision to believe that claim, because without WandaVision, Wanda is just the woman from the Avengers films who does telekinesis and glowing red things. WandaVision gives her the mythology she needs to carry the role she plays in what comes next. There's something worth sitting with in the specific nature of chaos magic as WandaVision presents it. Every other form of magic in the MCU, Doctor Strange's sorcery, the Darkhold's dark arts, even the Infinity Stones, operates within a kind of framework. Rules, architecture. Strange studies his craft, works within established magical traditions, uses tools and spells that were codified by centuries of practice. The stones manipulate pre-existing forces in reality. Even the Darkhold, for all its horror, is a book of spells. It teaches things. You have to learn it to use it. Chaos magic doesn't work like that. Wanda doesn't learn it. She doesn't study it. It responds to her emotional state. It's not a discipline, it's an expression. And that distinction is what makes her so fundamentally difficult to anticipate or defend against. You can prepare for a sorcerer. You cannot entirely prepare for grief given infinite power and no structural constraints on how it's expressed. That's the thing Phase 4 keeps returning to, with Wanda specifically. The danger isn't malice. The danger is magnitude without structure. Magnitude without the wisdom of restraint. And the Darkhold, rather than providing that structure, specifically dismantles whatever restraint remains. It finds the grief and the love and the longing and says, yes, these are correct, let them be everything. The result, by the time of Multiverse of Madness, is a woman who is technically more powerful than almost anyone in the MCU, and who has been specifically engineered by a corrupting book into being almost impossible to reason with. That's not villainy in the ordinary sense, it's a force condition. And a force condition of that magnitude, let loose in a multiverse full of cracks and incursion points, is exactly the kind of precondition that Phase 4 needed to establish before it could put Doctor Doom in the story. There's one more thing I want to mention here, which is the character of Vision himself, and the question of whether the Vision in Westview is real. Wanda rebuilt him from chaos magic and memory. He didn't have the Mind Stone. He had whatever Wanda's love and grief and power could approximate in its place. And Vision, being who he is, spends much of the series quietly noticing the wrongness of their situation and trying to understand it, rather than simply accepting the comfort of it. His final exchange with the White Vision, a vision that sword rebuilt from his original body, no Mind Stone, no Wanda-shaped soul, is one of Phase 4's genuinely lovely moments. Two things that might be a person discussing, very calmly and philosophically, whether either of them is real. The ship of Theseus, applied to a synthezoid, and the Westview Vision's answer that they are both the Vision, that identity is continuity of memory and action, not just composition, is quietly moving in a way the show doesn't oversell. All of which is to say, WandaVision is doing a lot, more than it looks like at the time. The grief, the chaos magic, the Darkhold, the power scale, the corrupting effect of wielding reality itself. These are all threads that Phase 4 needed to establish, and WandaVision is where most of them begin. The Darkhold especially, because the Darkhold is the thing that turns a grieving woman into a genuine multiversal threat. And that matters not just for Multiverse of Madness, but for understanding what Phase 4 is ultimately arguing. That the multiverse doesn't just attract powerful villains from outside, it creates them from the inside, from people who were perfectly good and are now perfectly broken. Right, let's talk about a memory spell that was never going to go well. Here's a thing I find quietly amusing about Spider-Man. No Way Home in the context of this whole discussion. It is comfortably the most purely joyful film in Phase 4. Possibly the most joyful film in the entire MCU, depending on your feelings about the first Guardians of the Galaxy. People cried in cinemas. People lost their minds when the doors opened and the lights came up. It was a communal experience in the old-fashioned sense, the kind that felt less like watching a film and more like attending an event. And it was also, quietly, the film most directly responsible for the physical destabilization of the multiverse as a structural reality within the MCU. Fun, no notes. So, to recap the setup, because it matters. Peter Parker's identity as Spider-Man has been publicly revealed at the end of Far From Home, and his life has consequently become extremely complicated. College applications are being rejected. MJ and Ned are being denied entry to MIT because of their association with him. He's being followed, scrutinized, treated as a threat, and rather than sit with that and figure it out the slow, difficult way, Peter does what 17-year-olds do, which is ask a wizard to make it everyone else's problem. He goes to Doctor Strange and asks him to cast a spell that will make everyone forget Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Strange, to his credit, is not entirely enthusiastic about this, but he begins the spell, and then Peter keeps interrupting it. Accept Ned to remember, accept MJ to remember, accept his aunt, accept his teachers, accept various people, until the spell becomes so thoroughly unstable that Strange has to contain it in the match-in-a-box, a sort of mystical snow globe for trapped spells, before it can fully release. But the damage is done in a more specific way than Peter realizes. The spell wasn't just about forgetting, it was about altering the memory of everyone in reality who knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And reality, as it turns out, includes people from other realities. Because the multiverse has already cracked open, he who remains is already dead. The branches are already there, and the spell reaches through those cracks and starts pulling people in. Villains, primarily, because the people who most urgently know Peter Parker is Spider-Man in other universes are the people who are trying to kill him at the time. What follows is genuinely lovely in a fan service sense, and I won't belabor the plot mechanics of it. The three Peters meeting and comparing notes and bickering and finding a kind of fraternity across their very different lives is exactly as good as it sounds. The older villains, Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus, Electro, the Lizard, Sandman, arrive as full people with their own histories rather than as thin callbacks. But what the film is doing structurally, and this is the piece that matters for our purposes, is demonstrating, very concretely, what happens when the membrane between universes is physically penetrated. You don't just get controlled travel, you get involuntary extraction, you get people ripped from their contexts and deposited in a universe where nothing about them belongs. You get the multiverse bleeding, and Doctor Strange's solution to all of this is just as significant as the problem. He casts a second spell, a larger, more extreme, more costly one, that makes everyone in all of reality forget that Peter Parker exists. Not just Spider-Man, Peter Parker, the person. Strange, Peter 3's girlfriend, doesn't remember him. Ned doesn't remember him. MJ doesn't remember him. He erases himself from the universe's memory to close the breach. That is a specifically haunting ending, and the film earns it, I think. But here's the thing about the spell Strange casts to close the breach. It works, but it is the application of enormous multiversal force to a problem that was created by insufficient respect for multiversal force. And the lesson Strange takes from it, or doesn't take from it, which is maybe more accurate, is going to become very relevant in Multiverse of Madness. There's something worth sitting with about Peter's specific choice at the end of this film, which doesn't always get enough credit in the structural analysis. He doesn't just agree to the memory spell, he suggests it. He asks Strange to make everyone forget, not Spider-Man. Everyone forget Peter Parker, his friends, his family, the people who love him. He offers his entire relational world as the price of closing the breach, and he does it without being asked. That's not the action of someone who got lucky and stumbled into heroism. That's an understanding arrived at by a 17-year-old through a very specific and extremely painful chain of events that the multiverse cannot keep bleeding just to preserve one person's comfort. And the film doesn't make it feel heroic in a grand sense. It makes it feel like loss, plain loss, the right choice and a terrible one simultaneously. Strange's expression in that final scene says something important too. He agreed to cast this version of the spell. He watched Peter make the choice, he performed the magic, and he's sitting in his sanctum afterward, looking like someone who got what he asked for and isn't sure how to feel about it. Because Strange has been here before, in a different way. He gave up the Time Stone to save Tony Stark. He bargained time itself to stop Dormammu, and the pattern of his character is that he makes the extreme call correctly and still carries it. The winds don't sit easily on him. That's a character being prepared, very deliberately, for a story in which the extreme calls will keep coming. Multiverse of Madness is the next one, and the toll accumulates, because Strange, by the end of No Way Home, is someone who has twice now attempted to use large-scale temporal or multiversal magic to fix a personal-scale problem. First, when he tried to alter time itself to protect the Eye of Agamotto in Infinity War. Second, with the memory spell here. Both times the scale got away from him. Both times there were consequences he didn't fully anticipate, and both times, in the moment, it sort of worked. The immediate problem was resolved, the breach was closed, the villain was cured or contained, but the cracks that were opened didn't close, not fully. Strange sealed the primary breach, but the multiverse is now demonstrably a thing that can be physically accessed from the primary MCU Earth. The membrane exists and has been shown to be permeable. That fact does not go away just because the immediate crisis is over. One small detail I want to flag, which is the mid-credits scene of No Way Home. Strange is sitting alone in his sanctum. He looks tired. His hands are doing the thing they do when he's thinking through something complex. He's sitting with the consequences of what the memory spell cost, and you get the sense that he's not entirely comfortable with the version of himself who made those choices. There's a third eye briefly visible on his forehead, an early hint of what dream walking will do to him. It's a quiet scene. 5 years ago, I'd have said it was just set up. Now it reads more like a character note. This is a man who reaches for extreme solutions and then has to live in the aftermath of them. That's not a criticism of Strange as a character. It's what makes him interesting. But it's worth keeping in mind for everything that follows. Also, and this is a fun detail if you know what's coming, the two Spider-Men from alternate universes who appear to help Peter here are technically variants. They're from branched realities that exist because the multiverse fractured. Their presence in the primary MCU during the events of No Way Home is a very small, very human-scale preview of what Doomsday promises to deliver at maximum volume. People from different universes standing in the same room, trying to figure out how to work together. No Way Home is, in this reading, a practice run for Avengers. Doomsday, done quietly, with teenagers in New York, which is either very tidy or very funny, depending on your mood, right? From a film about memory and identity and the cost of wanting things too much, to a film about what happens when someone wants things so much they're willing to tear the multiverse apart to get them. There is a single word introduced in Doctor Strange, in the Multiverse of Madness, that rewrites the stakes of the entire MCU going forward. Not dramatically introduced, it's not a moment with swelling music and a slow zoom. It's mentioned almost in passing, by a man in the middle of explaining why he had to have a previous version of Doctor Strange executed. The word is incursion. An incursion, as Reed Richards explains to Strange, while the Illuminati of Earth 838 hold him prisoner, is what happens when two universes occupy the same space. When the boundaries between parallel realities degrade far enough that they begin to overlap, the result is catastrophic. One or both of the colliding universes is destroyed. Entirely. Not damaged, not disrupted, erased from existence. It's worth dwelling on the mechanics of this for a moment, because the concept is doing a lot of work in the Doomsday setup, and it's easy to let the word wash over you without really sitting with what it means. An incursion is not an invasion. It's not one universe attacking another. It's more like two soap bubbles pressing against each other, except the bubbles contain entire civilizations, histories, billions of lives, everything that ever happened in those realities. And when they touch, when the boundary between them fails, one or both of those everything simply ceases to be, not conquered, not absorbed, gone. The Earth 838. Reed Richards knows this from direct experience. His universe survived an incursion caused by a variant of Strange, barely, at significant cost, by making a decision that the Illuminati presumably did not take lightly. And the preparation for incursions, the study of what causes them, and what, if anything, can prevent them, has been the work of the Earth 838 Illuminati ever since. They have protocols, they have databases, they have a very specific kind of institutional trauma that comes from knowing you survived an annihilation by the narrowest possible margin. Reed says it very calmly, the way he says most things. In his universe, a previous version of Doctor Strange caused an incursion. He used the Darkhold. He dreamwalked. He made choices that destabilized his reality to the point where it started bleeding into another one. And the Illuminati, the secret council that governs Earth 838 in the shadows, decided that the risk he posed was too great. They killed him, preemptively, before he could cause further damage. It's a brutal piece of information delivered in the most polite, measured possible way by a man who stretches his limbs and wears a blue suit and has clearly done a great deal of ethics reading. And it matters enormously because it's the moment the MCU names the threat that Phase 4 has been building toward. Not Kang, not the Council of Kangs, Incursions, the structural collapse of the multiverse, universes bleeding into and destroying each other, which is more or less the premise of Doomsday and Secret Wars. Now, Multiverse of Madness is a Sam Raimi film, and it wears that on its sleeve in the most delightful way. It is horror adjacent in a way most MCU films aren't. There's a sequence involving the Scarlet Witch moving through a camouflage that feels more like a slasher film than anything Marvel had made before. The Illuminati sequence, in which Wanda systematically and rather graphically eliminates some of the most powerful beings in a parallel universe, is shocking in the specific, blunt instrument way that Raimi does best. And the visual imagination throughout, the way realities collapse and bleed into each other as Strange and America Chavez tumble through the multiverse, is genuinely inventive. But underneath all of that, the film is carrying a very specific structural payload: America Chavez. Let's talk about her for a moment, because she tends to get a bit lost in discussions of this film. America is a teenager who can physically punch holes in the multiverse, not metaphorically. She physically punches a star-shaped hole through the fabric of reality and steps through it to another universe. She cannot control this power. It activates involuntarily, driven by fear, and she has been ricocheting across the multiverse for years, landing in different realities, unable to go home because she doesn't know how, and her power won't let her steer. She is, in the most literal sense, a walking incursion risk, a living reminder that the multiverse is not a thing that was built for people to travel through casually. Every time she punches a hole, she's doing something that has a cost. The film doesn't spell this out in detail, but the logic is there. If dreamwalking causes incursions when done badly, what does punching actual physical holes in reality do? The answer seems to be, it makes you an extremely valuable asset to anyone trying to navigate or control the multiverse, which is why Wanda wants her, why the Illuminati want to contain her, and presumably why Dr. Doom, when we get to Doomsday, will be very interested in what she represents. Moving on to Wanda herself, and I want to spend a little time here, because the film's treatment of her is the piece that divides people the most. The Wanda of Multiverse of Madness is not the Wanda of WandaVision. That's the point. The Darkhold got into her, and what the Darkhold does specifically is take your genuine desires, your real ones, the ones underneath everything, and amplify them until they consume everything else. Wanda genuinely loves her sons. She would do anything to be with them. The Darkhold looked at that love and said, "Interesting. What if you removed all the constraints on that impulse?" The result is a woman who has travelled to a parallel universe to steal the body of her own variant and take her variant's children as her own. Who is willing to kill the Illuminati, destroy Karmatage, and murder a teenager to get there? It's a lot. And I think the film makes a defensible case for it, but it requires you to have done the emotional work of WandaVision first, which is another reason WandaVision's placement in Phase 4 isn't accidental. It's doing the character groundwork that Multiverse of Madness requires to function. The film's resolution turns on an idea that I find genuinely interesting, that the children of Wanda's variant, when they actually see what Wanda has become, are terrified of her. They don't want to be with her. They don't know her. And that reality, that the children she's been chasing across the multiverse would look at her and feel fear, not recognition, is what breaks through the Darkhold's hold, long enough for her to make a different choice. She destroys every copy of the Darkhold, in every universe simultaneously, collapses Mount Wundagore on top of herself, and presumably dies, though the film is notably ambiguous about this. The Reed Richards of this film, John Krasinski, in what was clearly intended as a specific casting choice, and is now somewhat loaded with expectations given that Pedro Pascal plays the character in the main timeline, is worth dwelling on. Because his Reed is part of the Illuminati for a specific reason: incursion expertise. His universe's Illuminati specifically recruited him because his understanding of multiversal architecture is unparalleled. He knows what incursions are, what causes them, what stops them, and he dies in this film, killed by Wanda before he can share much of that knowledge with Strange. But the concept survives. Strange knows about incursions now. He knows they're real, that they've already happened in this multiverse, and that the people who caused them were people who used reality warping powers carelessly. That's information he carries forward. As does the third eye, the consequence of dream walking, visible on his forehead at the film's end. A permanent mark of the toll that multiversal travel takes on the person who does it. It's a small, quiet detail, but it's the kind of thing Phase 4 does consistently. The characters who interact with the multiverse are changed by it. Nobody comes back from that frontier unchanged. One more thing, and then we'll move on. The film establishes, through the Earth 838 Illuminati and their treatment of Strange, a vision of what organised multiversal governance looks like when it's run by well-intentioned but very paternalistic people. They decided to kill a Strange variant. They decided collectively that his threat level exceeded his value. They were wrong about the variant in front of them, and they all died for it. the idea of a governing body that manages multiversal threats, and the way that authority can calcify into something harmful, is a theme that runs through Phase 4 in various forms. The TVA, the Illuminati, Sword. These are all versions of the same institutional question. Who decides what's safe for the multiverse, and what happens when that authority is corrupted or wrong? Dr. Doom as a character has a very specific answer to that question, which is me, I decide. And if that sounds like He Who Remains, it should. We'll come back to that. For now, from Incursions and the word that changes everything, to a season of television that I think is quietly one of the best things Phase 4 produced, and that ends with a sacrifice that most people didn't fully clock until they sat with it for a while. Loki Season 2 is the Phase 4 entry. I think most deserves a quiet rewatch at this point, not because it's the flashiest thing Marvel produced in that era, it isn't, but because it completes a character arc that started in 2011 with a man falling off the Bifrost, and ends, in its final episode, with that same man making one of the more genuinely affecting sacrifices in MCU history. And it does it without any of the bombast you'd expect. The season picks up essentially where Season 1 left off, but it has a new problem layered on top of the multiversal branching. Loki is time-slipping, being involuntarily thrown backward and forward through the TVA's timeline, unable to control when he ends up. He'll be in the middle of a conversation, and suddenly he's back in the past, watching the same conversation happen, or forward in a future that might or might not occur, depending on what choices are made in the present. It sounds like a mechanical plot device, and it is, but it's also, very specifically, the thing that allows Loki to eventually solve the season's core problem. Because the more he slips through time, the more he learns. And the more he learns, the better equipped he becomes to understand what the temporal loom actually is and what's going wrong with it. The temporal loom is the TVA's great machine. It processes raw time, the branches that pour out of the sacred timeline, or in this case, the branches that pour out of everywhere since He Who Remains died, and weaves it into stable timelines. Without the loom, the branches just exist and then collapse. Millions of realities that exist briefly and then die. The problem in Season 2 is that there are too many branches now. The loom was designed by He Who Remains to handle exactly one timeline. Now it's being asked to handle an exponentially, catastrophically larger load, and it is failing. It is, quite literally, going to break the multiverse if someone doesn't fix it. All those branches will collapse. Every reality that grew in the spaces left by He Who Remains' death will be destroyed. This is the season's central moral dilemma, and it's genuinely interesting, because one option, proposed by Victor Timely, a Kang variant who is a gentle and enthusiastic turn-of-the-century inventor rather than a conqueror, is to just upgrade the loom, make it capable of handling infinite timelines, let everyone live. And then there's the darker option, which is what He Who Remains designed the TVA to do: prune the excess branches, kill the extra realities, return to one controlled stable timeline. Loki tries the first option, multiple times. He slips through time, refines the plan, brings in the right people, attempts to save Victor Timely from the paradoxes that keep killing him. And it doesn't work. The loom can't be upgraded fast enough. It's going to fail regardless. And so Loki ends up at the literal end of time, alone, watching the loom collapse, and he makes a decision. He reaches into the branches, all of them, takes hold of them physically with his hands. All the timelines that He Who Remains once crushed into a single thread, Loki catches them as they fall and holds them. And then he walks to the Citadel at the end of time, sits down in the seat where He Who Remains used to sit, and becomes the thing that holds the multiverse together. He becomes the World Tree, the Yggdrasil from Norse mythology, the great tree that connects all the realms. Except instead of a tree, it's a god of mischief, with branching timelines spread out from his hands like golden light. He does this alone, for what is presumably forever, or at least until someone finds a better solution. I want to sit with that for a moment, because it's a fairly extraordinary thing for a character to do. This is Loki, a man who spent 5 films wanting power, wanting recognition, wanting a throne, and he ends up with something more than any throne. He ends up holding existence itself in his hands, and he chooses it, not because he was told to, not because there was a mission and he was assigned to it, because he looked at the multiverse full of people who were finally alive and real and didn't want them to die. Tom Hiddleston plays it with this very still, very warm quality in those final moments. No heroic monologue, no dramatic declaration. He looks at his friends through the temporal glass, Mobius on a jet ski somewhere, Sylvie finding her life, and he smiles, and then he sits down. No notes. Now, structurally, what Season 2 does for Doomsday is this. The multiverse is now officially, canonically, completely unleashed. Loki is holding it together, but Loki is not he who remains. He's not pruning, he's not controlling, he's holding, which is different. All the branches exist, all the alternate realities exist. The infinite multiverse that he who remains spent his existence preventing, it's here. And that means the conditions for incursions are permanently in place. All you need is for 2 of those infinite branches to come close enough to each other, or for someone to force them together deliberately. And you get the kind of universe collision that Reed Richards described in Multiverse of Madness. Dr. Doom in the comics understands this better than anyone. His domain of Latveria may be small on Earth, but his ambitions extend across the whole of reality. He spent years in the comics studying multiversal architecture, and in the Secret Wars storyline, which Avengers, Secret Wars is presumably building toward, he uses the collision of 2 universes to essentially absorb their combined power and become God Emperor of a patchwork reality he literally names Battleworld. Season 2 of Loki is the series that makes this possible in the MCU framework. Without Loki holding the multiverse open rather than closed, you don't have the conditions for Doom's plan to function. Every branch Loki is holding is, potentially, a universe that could be steered into a collision course with another one by someone who knows what they're doing. There's one more thread from Season 2 worth flagging, which is the character of Ravonna Renslayer and the way she's used throughout the series. She's a true believer in the TVA's mission. Not just someone following orders, but someone who genuinely believes the controlled timeline is worth whatever it costs. And watching that conviction curdle as the truth of the TVA is revealed, that it was built on manipulation, on erased identities, on the arrogance of one man who decided he knew best, is a useful mirror for the kind of character Dr. Doom represents. Doom is a true believer too. He believes, genuinely and completely, that he is the best possible steward of power, that the world and the multiverse would be better managed by him than by anyone else. He's not wrong that chaos is bad. He's wrong about the solution. Renslayer ends up in the void at the end of time, eating a sandwich with Miss Minutes. It's either a very funny ending or a very sad one, and maybe both. The show doesn't tell you which. Season 2 ends with the multiverse fully branched and held by the god of mischief who found his purpose in the last place anyone would have looked for it. From here, the MCU's Phase 5 content starts filling in those branches. And there are a few specific ones we need to look at before we get to Doctor Doom, starting with a heist set inside a universe so small it used to fit in a briefcase. Quantumania has a bit of a reputation, and I think that reputation is about 60% fair and 40% uncharitable to what it was actually trying to do. The film is messy. The first act is a bit rushed. MODOK, the villain who used to be Darren Cross from the first Ant-Man, now a grotesque floating head with tiny limbs in an exoskeleton of his own face, is either brilliantly absurd or actively distracting depending on your threshold for that kind of thing. The family dynamics get a bit lost in the spectacle of the quantum realm, which is revealed to be an entire civilization down there, rather than just an empty void. But what Quantumania does that matters enormously, it establishes Kang the Conqueror as a genuine civilizational threat. Not a guy with a plan, not someone trying to collect things or impose an ideology, but a being who has conquered entire timelines. Multiple of them. Whole civilizations subjugated, reshaped, or destroyed. The Kang stranded in the quantum realm at the film's start was banished there by his own variants, because even his variants found him too dangerous. Think about that for a second. The people who are, in some meaningful sense, him, who share his intellect, his drive, his knowledge, considered this particular version of the same man too much of a threat to let exist freely. That's a specific kind of villain. Scott Lang, by the end of the film, has seemingly killed this Kang. The family escapes the quantum realm. Kang's multiversal engine, the device that would have let him escape and resume his conquests, is destroyed. By any reasonable measure, they won. And then the dying Kang says something to Scott, half warning and half taunt. You don't understand what you've set in motion. There are so many of us. Which turns out to be an understatement, as the post-credits scene demonstrates. The Council of Kangs, dozens, possibly hundreds of Kang variants from different timelines and universes, are gathered in a vast space, discussing the problem. A Kang was killed by some ants from a backwater universe, and this apparently constitutes a problem significant enough to convene the entire council. Now, here is where the real-world context matters for our purposes, and I want to address it directly rather than skip over it. Jonathan Majors, the actor playing Kang across the MCU, was convicted in late 2023 on assault and harassment charges. Marvel fired him, and the Kang storyline, which had been positioned as the Phase 5 and 6 through-line in the same way Thanos had been the Phase 1 through 3 through-line, was abandoned. Avengers, the Kang dynasty, was cancelled. The Russo brothers were brought back to direct a new fifth Avengers film, and Robert Downey Jr. was cast as the new villain. Doctor Doom. This pivot could have been catastrophic for the structural coherence of Phases 4 and 5. A lot of the groundwork that had been laid was Kang-specific. The Council of Kangs, the variants, the TVA's connection to Kang's legacy. But here's the interesting thing about what actually happened. Most of the thematic scaffolding transferred remarkably cleanly to Doom. Because Kang's power was always conceptual, the threat he represented wasn't about his specific abilities, it was about multiversal mastery, about a being who understood the multiverse as architecture and knew how to exploit its weak points. About the idea that when the multiverse is fully branched, someone out there will figure out how to use that instability as a weapon. Doctor Doom is that someone, except he's been doing it in the comics for about 60 years longer than Kang, and his ceiling is higher. The comics run that Doomsday and Secret Wars are building toward, the Jonathan Hickman Secret Wars from 2015, involves Doom literally absorbing the power of the Beyonders, cosmic entities of incomprehensible power, to save what remains of the multiverse after a chain of incursions destroys most of it. He doesn't just conquer a universe, he rescues one, and then rules it as God. The quantum realm, in this context, is important not because of Kang specifically, but because of what it reveals about multiversal structure. It's a space that exists between universes, a subatomic membrane through which you can access different realities. Janet Van Dyne spent 30 years in there and came out with an intimate understanding of its geography, and the fact that Kang's entire civilization, his conquered subjects, his rebels, his entire imprisoned world, existed down there says something about the quantum realm's relationship to the multiverse as a whole. If incursions are what happen when two universes touch on the outside, the quantum realm might be the inside, the connective tissue between realities. And anyone who understands that connective tissue, who can navigate it, who can use it as a road between universes rather than a destination in itself, that person would have a very specific kind of power that a straightforward fight can't neutralize. Kang knew this. His multiversal engine was built to exploit it. Whether Doom has an equivalent apparatus, his time machine in the comics, the mystical sciences of Latveria, is something Doomsday will presumably answer. The other thing Quantumania does, which is smaller but worth mentioning, is give Scott Lang a very specific kind of weight. He's haunted by Kang's dying words. He returns to his ordinary life, daughter, family, the sandwich shop that bears his face. And he cannot enjoy any of it properly because he keeps thinking about what Kang said. He keeps thinking about what he might have started. Scott Lang worrying about the consequences of a fight he technically won is a specific kind of anxiety. It's not the kind you fix with a bigger fight. It's the kind that requires knowing more, and the universe, in Quantumania's aftermath, is not in a generous mood for providing clarity. The anxiety will be justified, as it turns out. The Council of Kangs was a real threat, and then it wasn't because of real-world events outside the story. And now there's something arguably worse filling the structural vacuum from a universe where Reed Richards already understood exactly what incursions were and exactly how dangerous reality-warping technology could be. Which is a nice segue, actually. Before we get to the Fantastic Four themselves, let's spend some time with a film that Phase 4 produced that everyone sort of agreed to forget about, but which was quietly doing some of the heaviest cosmic lifting of the entire era. There is still a massive stone hand sticking out of the Indian Ocean. This is not a metaphor. In the MCU, as of the end of Eternals, a celestial, an ancient cosmic entity of incomprehensible scale, attempted to emerge from the core of the Earth, using the planet's biosphere as fuel for its birth. The Eternals stopped it, which meant it died mid-emergence, and its stone body, billions of tons of fossilized cosmic giant, remained. Half of it is still below the ocean floor. The hand, wrist, and forearm are above the surface, and as far as we can tell from subsequent MCU content, no one has really dealt with this. The world knows. Arishem, the Celestial who created the Eternals and assigned them to Earth, arrived at the film's end and took several of the Eternals away for judgment to determine whether Earth's survival was worth the Celestial that didn't get born. That judgment hasn't been delivered on screen yet. This is either a dropped thread or an extremely patient one. Given where the MCU is heading, I'd argue it's the latter. Eternals as a film operates at a different scale than most of what surrounds it in Phase 4. It's not about individual heroism or team dynamics or even multiversal mechanics in the way those other films are. It's about civilizations, about geological time, about the idea that the universe operates according to processes that are entirely indifferent to the survival of any individual species, including humanity. The Celestials seed planets, grow them for millions of years, and then harvest the resulting Celestial by allowing it to be born through the planet's core, consuming the world in the process. This is not villainy. This is biology. This is ecology. This is how the universe makes more of itself. The Eternals were created specifically to facilitate this process. They were built to guide developing civilizations, to prevent the deviants from killing humans before the population reached the critical mass needed to fuel the emergence, and to do all of this without knowing what they were doing or why. Their memories were wiped between deployments. They were, in the most fundamental sense, instruments, made to do a job without the capacity to refuse it. And then Cersei found out, and decided that she did in fact have the capacity to refuse. What Eternals does for the MCU, thematically, is establish the existence of forces that operate at a scale that makes even the Infinity Stones look like local concerns. The Celestials didn't collect stones to reshape reality. They shaped reality by being what they are. Arishem created the sun, multiple suns. He created the Eternals as tools. He created the Deviants as a predator to manage the population growth of prey species on developing worlds. This is the bit where, if you watch Eternals in a certain mood, you sort of stare at the wall for a moment. the scope is genuinely difficult to hold in your head. The film is asking, in its quieter moments, what it means to be a creature designed by something that powerful. Whether identity is possible when your entire existence has been engineered toward a purpose you didn't choose. Whether love and memory and genuine connection can persist even when the being experiencing them was made specifically to be unable to keep them. Gilgamesh and Thena, Circe and Icarus, Druig and Makari. The Eternals' relationships feel fragile and precious in a way that's inseparable from the knowledge that they were never supposed to have them. Now, where does this connect to Doomsday? In a few ways, actually. The first is scale. Doomsday, from what we know of it, operates at the largest scale the MCU has ever attempted. 3 universes on a collision course. Doctor Doom as a villain with ambitions that match the Beyonders in the comics. You don't build toward that scale without establishing first that the universe contains forces and entities operating at the civilizational and even cosmic level. Eternals is part of that groundwork. It says quite directly, the scale of threat you've seen so far is not the upper limit. The upper limit is this. The second is the celestial hand, which I keep coming back to because I think it matters. That hand is a vulnerability. An incomplete celestial, partially emerged, is an anomaly in the cosmic order that the remaining celestials are presumably not happy about. Arisham's judgment over the Eternals is still pending, and when Doomsday brings 3 universes into contact, the question of what a cosmic entity like Arisham does in response to that, whether the Celestials function as another variable in the conflict, whether Doom has factored them into his plans, seems like exactly the kind of thing the MCU is holding in reserve. The third thing Eternals contributes is a bit more abstract. It's the idea of an authority that made you, controls you, and considers your individual survival entirely secondary to its purposes. He Who Remains did this to the TVA workers, Arishem did this to the Eternals, the Darkhold does a version of it to its readers, and Doctor Doom, in most of his best iterations, presents himself as the logical endpoint of that principle, someone who is so certain of his own superiority that he believes he has the right to make those choices for everyone else. He's not wrong that someone needs to manage the chaos. He's wrong that it should be him. Or maybe he's right, and that's the more interesting version of the argument. Eternals is actually quite good at holding that ambiguity without resolving it. Tiamut, the emerging celestial that Circe turns to stone, was going to be a new god. A new source of power that would have allowed Arishem to create more Eternals, more worlds, more of the cosmic cycle that makes the universe what it is. By stopping the emergence, Circe and the other Eternals didn't just save Earth, they may have disrupted something much larger. The film doesn't condemn them for it, but it doesn't entirely vindicate them either. It just says, this happened, and the consequences are still unfolding, and the being who made you has taken several of you away to decide what it thinks about the choice you made. That judgment is, as far as we know, still outstanding. There is something very on brand about the MCU holding a literal, divine tribunal in abeyance for several years, while everyone argues about the multiverse. One last thing about Eternals before we move on. Thanos, as it turns out, is the biological child of 2 Eternals, Zurus and Aelurs. This is name-dropped in the film, and then left almost entirely undiscussed, which means that the man who killed half the universe to preserve its resources, explicitly framed in his own mind as a resource management problem, a way of preventing cosmic overpopulation and ecosystem collapse, was the son of beings created by the same system that was going to destroy the Earth in service of cosmic expansion. The circularity of that is quite something. Thanos was, in a way, applying celestial logic to a human scale. Kill half to preserve the rest, and the universe he left behind, cracked open by the time heist branched by Loki Season 1, destabilized by Incursions, is the universe that Doctor Doom is going to arrive in. Everything connects. Not neatly, not in a way that looks like a plan from the inside, but from here, with the whole shape visible, there's a thread. Right, from the cosmic and the geological, back to the human scale, specifically to two men with healing factors. A TVA that doesn't quite know what it's doing anymore, and a void at the end of time where discarded realities go to sit. Deadpool and Wolverine is a film I feel slightly awkward, including in a sleep video, given that it has the energy of someone who has had several espressos and is extremely pleased about this. It is the opposite of calm. It is loud, violent, fourth wall shattering, and genuinely rather funny. Ryan Reynolds as Wade Wilson is, I think, incapable of being anything other than full volume. But we're not watching it right now, we're talking about it. And talking about it, at this hour, at this pace, we can extract the structural things it does without having to also absorb the fight choreography and the very specific noise that Wolverine makes when he's unhappy. So, the setup. Deadpool's universe is dying. The TVA still operating, though in a notably different state post-Loki Season 2, more chaotic, more overwhelmed, less like an organised bureaucracy and more like a skeleton crew keeping the lights on, arrives to tell Wade that his universe's anchor being is dead. The anchor being, in TVA terminology, is the person in any given universe whose existence is most fundamental to that universe's stability. The metaphysical keystone. In Wade's universe, that person was the local variant of Wolverine, who is gone. Without an anchor being, the universe is marked for pruning. Everyone in it will cease to exist. This piece of lore, anchor beings, the TVA's role in managing dying universes, the bureaucratic process by which realities are deleted, is doing something specific for the Doomsday setup. It confirms that even in a post-He Who Remains TVA, the organisation is still functional enough to identify threats, to monitor universes, to make judgments about what gets saved and what gets pruned. And it confirms that the multiverse, even with Loki holding it, is not a perfectly stable system. Universes still fail. Timelines still collapse. The machinery is creaking. Wade's solution is to find another Wolverine. He goes looking through the multiverse, accessed presumably via TVA tech since he can't punch star-shaped portals the way America Chavez can, and finds the Logan of the story, a deeply depressed, largely drunk variant who calls himself, with bleak accuracy, the worst Wolverine. His X-Men all died because of his failures. He has been living in a kind of voluntary purgatory, alone, existing without really living. The film is, underneath all the noise, a story about two broken people who need each other. Wade's relentlessness and genuine warmth versus Logan's sealed-off grief. It's not a subtle film, but it's sincere, and that sincerity is what earns its ending. They end up in the void, which we need to talk about. The void, as established in Loki Season 1, is where the TVA sends pruned timelines. It's the place at the end of time where discarded realities go. A vast, bleak landscape made up of the wreckage of everything that wasn't allowed to exist. Abandoned buildings, half-destroyed worlds, the refuse of infinite deleted histories, piled up and left to decay under a purple sky. In Deadpool and Wolverine, the void has a ruler. Cassandra Nova, Charles Xavier's twin sister, killed before birth, somehow surviving in a fragmented form and eventually finding her way to this wasteland where she rules over the pruned variants who ended up there. She's collected some notable ones: Blade, Gambit, Elektra, Laura, various versions of Marvel characters whose timelines were pruned and who have been surviving in the void under Cassandra Nova's less than gentle authority. The void in this context is a kind of compressed argument about what the TVA's actions have actually produced. Every pruned timeline is a reality that was deemed expendable by an authority that didn't ask anyone's permission. The void is where those expendable realities ended up, and the society that formed there, hostile, survival-focused, ruled by a woman who embodies the idea that psychological damage becomes power when there's nothing left to lose, is essentially what unmanaged multiversal chaos looks like at the human scale. Doom in the comics saw the void as something to be avoided. In Secret Wars, when the multiverse was collapsing under the weight of incursions, universe after universe smashing into each other and being destroyed, Doom's intervention was specifically to prevent the equivalent of the void. He absorbed the power that was destroying the multiverse and used it to build something instead of nothing. Whether the MCU Doom has any connection to the void or to the pruned realities it represents is unknown at the time of recording. But the void's existence, the fact that the TVA has spent an unknown amount of time deleting realities, and the accumulated wreckage of those deletions is physically present somewhere, seems like the kind of thing a person who wants to control the multiverse would find either useful or concerning. One more thing about Deadpool and Wolverine and its structural importance. The film confirms, quite clearly, that the multiverse is accessible to regular people now. Not just sorcerers, not just beings with specific powers. Wade Wilson, a mercenary from a dying universe, is able to travel across multiple realities with TVA equipment. The infrastructure of multiversal travel has been demonstrated, documented, and in some cases physically delivered in a briefcase by a bloke with a name badge. This matters because it means Doomsday's premise, 3 universes on a collision course, doesn't require exotic explanation. The mechanisms by which separate universes come into contact have been demonstrated. The TVA can do it, the sorcerers can do it, America Chavez punches it, and whoever builds the right machine, say someone with the resources of a nation-state and several decades of working on exactly this problem, could theoretically engineer it deliberately. The Fantastic Four's arrival in the primary MCU is treated in Thunderbolt's post-credits scene as the Baxter Foundation crossing universes. Their ship, coming through from Earth 828, is essentially an incursion in miniature. Controlled perhaps, intentional. But 2 universes making contact nonetheless. And that's the final piece before we get to the Fantastic Four film itself. There's a warmth to Deadpool and Wolverine's ending that I think the film earns, even if the journey there is exhausting in the best way. Logan choosing to stay, Wade choosing connection over easy comfort. The Void's residents finding a version of escape. It's a film about the value of the things the TVA would prune. Individual lives, specific relationships, the particular texture of someone's existence. And why they matter even when the cosmic machinery doesn't care about them. Dr. Doom would argue they don't matter. Or more precisely, he'd argue they matter less than the stability of the whole, and that the whole is best maintained by someone with sufficient intelligence and will to make the necessary sacrifices. Logan would disagree with that argument at great physical length, but that's for Doomsday to establish, presumably. Let's talk about a family in 1964 who have absolutely no idea they're about to end up in someone else's apocalypse. The Fantastic Four, First Steps is set in 1964. That specific choice to set the MCU's Fantastic Four origin film, not in the present day but in a retro-futurist 1960s, complete with the aesthetic of the space age, the Cold War as background noise, and a world that believes science will answer everything, is one of the more interesting creative decisions in Phase 5 and 6. And it's not just an aesthetic choice, it's a structural one. Because it means that when Reed Richards, Sue Storm, Ben Grimm, and Johnny Storm arrive in the primary MCU, they are not from a different version of the present. They are from a different universe entirely. Earth 828, a reality where history diverged from the primary MCU's Earth at some point and went its own way. They are 4 people from a world that looks like a certain kind of dream of the past who have come forward and sideways into a world they don't recognize, at a moment in that world's history when everything is about to break. The film itself begins 4 years after the Fantastic Four gained their powers. That context matters. They're established heroes by the time we meet them, not in origin story mode. Reed Richards is the acknowledged genius building and problem solving. Sue Storm, his wife, and by the end of the film, the mother of his unborn child, controls the invisible forces that hold reality together, which feels appropriate given the themes of Phase 4 and 5 overall. Ben Grimm is the Thing, stone-skinned, enormously strong, carrying his transformation with a kind of weary grace that the film renders quite movingly. Johnny Storm is the Human Torch, burning and reckless and, in the film's texture, the most human of the four, despite being literally on fire. The Silver Surfer arrives on Earth 828, and his arrival means one thing: Galactus is coming. Galactus, as a threat, is not like anything the MCU has deployed before. He's not a person with a plan. He is a force of nature that happens to have a face. He consumes planets to survive. That's not cruelty, any more than a wildfire is cruel. It's just appetite at a scale that erases civilizations as a side effect. The Fantastic Four have been tracking the disappearances of planets, entire worlds gone consumed, in the time before the film starts, and they know the direction of travel. The attempt to reason with Galactus is one of the film's more interesting sequences, because it refuses to make the outcome feel surprising. You cannot reason with a process. You can only divert or delay it, and the film doesn't pretend otherwise. What the Four ultimately manage is a partial solution, buying Earth 828 time at a cost, and the decision made in the aftermath is to cross universes. To find somewhere the children of this world, and specifically the child growing inside Sue Storm, might be safer, or at least different. The Baxter Foundation crosses the membrane between Earth 828 and the primary MCU. Now, from a pure lore standpoint, this is an incursion. Not a catastrophic one. It's controlled, it's intentional, it uses technology that Reed Richards specifically built for the purpose. But it's the incursion mechanism at small, deliberate scale, and contact between realities is contact between realities, regardless of the intent behind it. Reed Richards would know this better than anyone. He spent time on Earth 838 in Multiverse of Madness as part of an Illuminati that specifically recruited him for his incursion expertise. His primary MCU variant presumably has the same knowledge, built from a different foundation, but arriving at the same conclusions. The question the film quietly asks but can't answer, because Doomsday is where the answer lives, is whether a controlled crossing is genuinely safe, or whether it's just a less immediately catastrophic version of the same process. Whether Reed's confidence in his own engineering is sufficient justification. There is something very Reed Richards about that kind of justified overconfidence. The film also introduces something that I think is underappreciated in discussions of how it sets up Doomsday: Sue Storm's pregnancy. Their child, presumably Franklin Richards in the comics, is a mutant of such extraordinary power that in the source material he's capable of creating pocket universes. Actual universes. Not magic tricks, not simulations. Real cosmological structures, built from scratch by a child who doesn't fully understand what he's doing. The MCU hasn't delivered Franklin Richards yet, but the pregnancy is established, and the child will be born into the primary MCU. And if the comics Franklin is any guide to where this is going, that child is a wild card of genuinely cosmic proportions that Dr. Doom, who in the Hickman Secret Wars uses Franklin's universe-creating power as part of his plan to save and rebuild the multiverse, will presumably be very interested in. I realise I'm getting speculative at this point, and I want to be clear that I'm speculating. The MCU's version may diverge from the comics considerably. It usually does. But the structural position, Reed Richards in the primary MCU, carrying incursion knowledge and a child of potentially universe-creating power, is confirmed by the film, and it slots into the Doomsday setup in a way that feels deliberate. Reed Richards and Dr. Doom in the comics are the most defining relationship in the Fantastic Four's history. Not romantic, something closer to the relationship between the best and second best student in the same class, where the rivalry calcified into something deeply personal on both sides. Reed's genius always slightly exceeded Victor's, and Victor could never forgive this, and what began as wounded pride became, through years of bitterness and mystical disfigurement and political power, one of the most complex antagonisms in superhero fiction. The MCU version of this relationship has not been shown yet, as of this recording, but it's being constructed. Pedro Pascal plays Reed Richards in the primary MCU. Robert Downey Jr. plays Victor Von Doom. Their first meeting, whenever it happens, in whatever form, is one of the scenes I'm most looking forward to in the entire Phase 6 era. And the Fantastic Four's arrival in the primary MCU is what makes that meeting possible. They have to exist here, in this universe, for the confrontation to have the weight it needs. Their crossing from Earth 828 is, in this reading, not just a creative choice about how to introduce legacy characters, it's a specific structural decision. Bring incursion-aware Reed Richards into a universe that is already dealing with incursion-level threats, and see what happens when he encounters the man from his own mythology who's been using those threats as a ladder. The film ends with the four of them arriving somewhere new, strangers in a world they don't know, with their first child on the way. It's a warm ending, a little uncertain, a little brave, the way most beginnings are. The world they've arrived in is, as we've established, one in which the multiverse is fully branched. The TVA is strained. Several people have been seriously damaged by their interactions with reality-bending forces, and someone very intelligent and very old is about to arrive and start using all of that instability as a foundation for something that will either save everything or doom it, depending presumably on your perspective. And the person with the most specific, most carefully considered perspective on all of this is the one we haven't actually talked about yet in depth. So let's talk about Victor Von Doom. Let me describe Dr. Doom to you for a moment, not as he'll appear in the trailer, masked, scarred face, the green armor and the cape, and the particular bearing of a man who has decided he is the most important person in any room he enters, but as a character concept, because the concept is what makes him such a fitting endpoint for everything Phase 4 built. Victor Von Doom is, at baseline, a Romani man from a small Eastern European nation called Latveria, who grew up watching his people exploited and discarded by the powerful, whose mother made a deal with a demon and paid for it with her soul, who was sent to university and became the most gifted, scientific, and mystical mind of his generation, and who had his face scarred, partially by an explosion he designed, but more significantly by his own impatience, his own refusal to admit a small error in his calculations, and chose to make that scar into armor, literally and figuratively. It's an origin story that's simultaneously grandiose and oddly specific, and I think that specificity is exactly what makes it work. He became the ruler of Latveria, not through inheritance or election, but through will and capability and the specific kind of determination that comes from someone who has spent their whole life watching the world be managed badly by people less qualified than themselves. He built his armor, he mastered sorcery, he defeated time itself to rescue his mother's soul from hell, which is, depending on your perspective, either the most grandiose thing any Marvel character has ever done, or a surprisingly tender act of filial devotion dressed up in extremely dramatic clothing. Possibly both. And his actual goal, if you trace it through the comics, across 60-odd years of Doom stories, is not world domination in the cartoonish sense. It's closer to civilizational management. He wants order. He wants the right person, him specifically, which is not really an argument for order so much as an argument for him, to be in charge of the forces that shape reality. Because in his view, the universe left to its own devices produces chaos, and chaos produces suffering. And he has seen enough suffering in Latveria and in the world to be genuinely motivated by the desire to end it. He's wrong, or he's probably wrong, or wrong about the methods, if not the motivation. But he's not lying when he frames his ambitions as a form of stewardship. Now, why does Phase 4 set him up so well? Phase 4 spent its entire runtime demonstrating this. Through every broken institution, every well-meaning person who made things worse, every governing body that turned out to be corrupt, overwhelmed, or simply wrong about its own authority. We've covered the evidence at length. The point is that the vacuum it all leaves is shaped exactly like Doctor Doom. Every institution that Phase 4 presents for managing multiversal threats turns out to be flawed, corrupted or compromised, or just not up to the scale of what's coming. And then Doctor Doom arrives, and he would argue, of course, you've been doing this wrong. Let me show you how it's done. That's his pitch essentially. Not follow me because I'm the villain, but the things that have been protecting you have failed and will keep failing. And I am the only one with the combination of intelligence, preparation, and will to do what actually needs to be done. It's persuasive in the same way that He Who Remains was persuasive. And it's the same argument, dressed in armor instead of a purple suit, wielding power instead of merely talking about it. There's a scene described in the leaked CinemaCon footage from the Doomsday trailer where Thor, who has fought more catastrophic threats than anyone still alive in the MCU, says that he has never encountered an enemy that frightens him the way this one does, that all his heroes and friends died, and Doom is kneeling in that scene, which is notable because Doctor Doom doesn't kneel. He kneels when he chooses to, which means he's making a choice in that moment, a performance. He's letting them see him at something that looks like vulnerability, and whether that's genuine or tactical is presumably the film's central question. Robert Downey Jr. as Doctor Doom is a casting decision that I keep returning to, because it operates on so many levels simultaneously. On the most immediate level, it's shocking. The face of the MCU's heroic era, Tony Stark, the character who started everything in 2008 and ended the Infinity Saga with a snap that cost him his life, returning not as that hero, but as the thing that might unmake what that hero built. There's something almost mythological about that structure. The founder returns as the destroyer. The man who once said, "I am Iron Man," now behind a mask, a different kind of armor, a different kind of certainty about what the world needs. On a thematic level, it's very specific. Tony Stark and Victor Von Doom are similar in the ways that make them both interesting and both dangerous. Both are the smartest person in the room and have never been fully comfortable with that claim. Both lost people early and were shaped by the loss. Both built their identities around systems of control. Iron Man as technological protection, Doom as political and mystical dominion. Both believe, with complete sincerity, that they know what the world needs, and that the world would be better off if it just listened to them. The difference is what happens when they're wrong. Tony, over the course of the Infinity Saga, learned to be wrong. He was wrong about Ultron. He was wrong about the Accords as the right solution to hero accountability. He was wrong about the original plan against Thanos. Each time he adjusted. He built new arguments from the rubble of the old ones. He grew. Doom doesn't grow, or rather, he improves his capabilities and his plans, but he never questions the fundamental premise. He never seriously entertains the possibility that he isn't the right answer. That incapacity for self-doubt is what makes him genuinely dangerous, and it's what makes him a natural villain for a storyline about the management of infinite reality. That's also, interestingly, why casting RDJ feels so precise. Tony Stark's arc was the arc of a man learning humility, learning that the weapons he built hurt people, that the infrastructure he designed had gaps, that being the smartest person in the room didn't mean being the one who should be making unilateral decisions for everyone else in it. Doom is the version of that arc that doesn't take, the brilliance without the growth, the armor without the wound underneath having been addressed. There's a version of Victor Von Doom who is Tony Stark at his worst, preserved in amber, convinced by events and ideology that self-doubt was always a weakness rather than a tool. That's not a coincidence of casting, that's the whole point. And it's the culmination of something Phase 4 was circling around consistently. What happens when the wrong person is the only person capable enough to hold something together? What happens when the choice is between imperfect people who are trying and a perfect person who has stopped questioning himself entirely? The Doomsday and Secret Wars setup in the comics, the Hickman run, is fundamentally about what happens when the multiverse is collapsing and someone steps in to save it, and that someone is Doctor Doom. He does save it. He genuinely, sincerely saves what remains of existence from being completely destroyed. And then he builds it in his image and rules it and calls it Battleworld and thinks he's done a good thing. And maybe, the comics suggest, he has, mostly, from a certain angle, in comparison to the alternative of total annihilation. Whether the MCU takes that structure directly or adapts it remains to be seen. But the thematic resonance is there, sitting underneath everything Phase 4 built. Every cracked timeline, every damaged sorcerer, every incursion that was named and feared and studied, all of it points toward a moment when someone arrives with a plan, and that someone is a man in a metal mask who believes that the universe, left to itself, will always make a mess of things. And looking at the evidence Phase 4 presents, he's not entirely wrong. That's the uncomfortable thing about the best versions of Doctor Doom. He's not entirely wrong. There's a whole category of Phase 4 and 5 content I've been moving past without dwelling on, and it deserves its own moments before we get to the final reflections. Not everything in these phases was about the multiverse. Some of it was about the world left behind by Endgame, a world where half the population had vanished and then returned 5 years later, where the Avengers were scattered and changed and in some cases dead, where the people who needed to step up weren't the ones who had been prepared for the role. And those stories, while less directly connected to the Doomsday mechanics, are building the cast of characters who are going to be in the room when Doom arrives. Let's start with Sam Wilson, because his arc in Falcon and the Winter Soldier is one of the cleaner examples of Phase 4 doing the character work that the larger story requires. Sam taking up the shield, becoming Captain America, isn't just a torch-passing moment for its own sake. It's an argument made through his specific background and his specific choice of battles, about what the symbol of Captain America means in a world that has been through what the MCU's world has been through. Steve Rogers was a product of a specific era of American mythology. Sam Wilson is someone who knows exactly how that mythology has been weaponized and misused, and he chooses to carry the shield anyway. Not because the mythology is perfect, but because the aspiration underneath it, the genuine one, the one Steve was actually trying to embody, is worth reaching for. The Flag Smashers, the Super Soldier Serum, John Walker's disintegration under the weight of a role he wasn't ready for. The show is working through the question of what a symbol is worth when the institutions behind it are corrupt or broken. And Sam's answer is, the symbol is separate from the institution. You can reclaim it. That distinction matters for the Doomsday setup in a specific way. Sam Wilson, the new Captain America, is going to be in that film, presumably, and he represents a specific kind of moral clarity in the chaos. Not certainty, he's too thoughtful for certainty, but clarity about what it means to stand for something when the systems that used to underwrite that stance are gone. Black Panther, Wakanda. Forever, meanwhile, is doing something quite different. It's a film that was made under the weight of real grief. Chadwick Boseman's death meant the story of T'Challa had to be concluded in a film that was never going to be what it was originally planned to be. And what the film becomes, in response to that, is something more interesting than a simple continuation. It becomes a meditation on mourning in a world that doesn't slow down for mourning. The global powers immediately start targeting vibranium. Wakanda, bereft of its king and its most powerful warrior, is suddenly vulnerable in ways it wasn't when T'Challa was alive. And then Namor arrives. Namor, Submariner, ruler of Talokan, an underwater civilization that has existed for centuries, hidden from the surface world, built on its own vibranium deposits and its own history of colonization and survival. The film presents him with considerable sympathy. He's not wrong that the surface world would strip Talokan of everything it has if given the chance. He's not wrong that Wakanda's recent emergence from isolation has put both their nations at risk. Where he's wrong is in his proposed solution, which is preemptive war rather than alliance. Shuri, grieving her brother and channeling that grief into something harder than she was before, ends up as the new Black Panther. Not a replacement for T'Challa. The film is careful to resist that framing, but a continuation of something. A different person carrying the same responsibility with a different kind of damage underneath it. What Wakanda Forever adds to the Doomsday picture is this. As of this film, there are now two powerful, hidden civilizations in the MCU, Wakanda and Talokan, that have their own histories, their own technologies, their own reasons to distrust the surface world. The adamantium recovered from the celestial Tiamut's body gets processed into a super soldier program by the end of Brave New World. The world is getting denser with power, with factions, with competing interests. Dr. Doom, who rules a small nation and understands better than most what it means to be powerful and threatened and tired of being condescended to, is going to arrive in a world full of people who have those same feelings. That's not coincidental. Doom's pitch, "I can manage all of this, I have a plan, trust me," lands differently when the people he's talking to have lived through the specific failures of the systems that were supposed to be managing things. He's not going to convince everyone, but he's going to convince some people, or at least give them pause. And that ambiguity is what makes him interesting. Now, Thunderbolts, or Thunderbolts as the marketing insists, with the asterisk, is the Phase 5 film that gathers together a group of morally compromised, government-adjacent, significantly damaged people and asks whether they can function as something better than the sum of their individual disasters. Yelena Belova, Red Guardian, Ghost, US Agent, Taskmaster's successor, and eventually Bucky Barnes, all of them with government histories, all of them with complicated relationships to the idea of heroism, all of them carrying things that haven't been resolved. The film's central reveal involves the Sentry, an original character for the film, though borrowed from the comics, and the Void, which turns out to be connected to him in a way that's specific to this version of the story. Bob Reynolds, the Sentry, contains within him one of the most destructive forces in the MCU, a manifestation of pure negation, of the death drive made cosmically powerful. And the Thunderbolt's mission becomes about helping him hold it together, rather than destroying him to contain it. It's a quieter film than the name suggests. The found family dynamics are genuinely well realised, and Yelena Belova continues to be one of the MCU's most consistently compelling newer additions, carrying the weight of her entire history with the Red Room and the complex grief of losing Natasha without ever becoming mopey about it. What Thunderbolts does for Doomsday, concretely, is provide the team. The new Avengers, as they end up being called informally, are the people who will be on the ground when Dr. Doom arrives. Bucky Barnes, Sam Wilson, Yelena, the various people from the various Phase 4 and 5 stories who ended up on the right side of things through a combination of survival and choice. They're not the original Avengers. They don't have that history, that institutional weight. They're improvised. They're the people who were there. And the post-credits scene of Thunderbolts, which features the Fantastic Four's ship crossing into the primary MCU, is the final stitch in the setup. That moment, the Baxter Foundation arriving, Reed Richards stepping into a universe he doesn't know yet, presumably carrying his knowledge of Incursions and his complicated mythology with Dr. Doom, is Phase 5's way of saying, all the pieces are now on the board. We've been sitting with the setup across this entire video. Loki cracked the multiverse open. WandaVision established what chaos magic could do. No Way Home demonstrated that the breach was physical and permeable. Multiverse of Madness named Incursions and showed what they cost. Quantumania showed the Conqueror and then lost him to circumstances. Loki Season 2 held the multiverse open with the last act of a character who spent his life trying to be worth something. Eternals placed a celestial hand in the ocean and hasn't finished that sentence yet. Deadpool and Wolverine confirmed the TVA is operational, but strained, and showed us the wreckage of everything that's been pruned. The Fantastic Four arrived from a universe where the sky fell, and they brought Reed Richards and his incursion knowledge with them. And somewhere in all of that architecture, a man in a green cape and a metal mask is moving pieces. I want to resist doing a traditional summary here, because we've covered a lot of ground, and going back over the same ground with bullet points isn't really what this is for. But there is something worth doing, which is sitting with the whole thing for a moment, the whole shape of Phase 4 as a project, and noticing what it actually feels like when you take it all together. Because it feels different now than it did at the time. That's the honest answer. At the time, Phase 4 felt, to a lot of people, like the MCU, trying to figure out what it was after Endgame. And there was truth in that. Endgame was such a complete and emotionally satisfying conclusion to such a long story that anything coming after it was going to struggle for definition. What do you do after you've killed Thanos and everyone came back and Tony Stark said, "I am Iron Man," one last time and died for it? What kind of story follows that? The answer Phase 4 gave was smaller stories mostly, more intimate, more character-focused. WandaVision is a grief story dressed up as a sitcom. Loki is a story about a man learning that what he actually wanted was not power, but belonging. Falcon and the Winter Soldier is a story about what it means to carry a symbol when the symbol's meaning is contested. Even the bigger films, Multiverse of Madness, No Way Home, are at their core about individuals and their choices and what those choices cost. And the multiverse was the connective tissue, not Kang as it turned out, the multiverse itself. The idea that when you remove the guardrails from infinite possibility, what you get is not freedom but instability, and that instability is a condition, a state of the world that all the subsequent stories exist within. Every Phase 4 character is operating inside a reality that has been cracked, a multiverse that has been branched, a cosmos that no longer has a single authoritative structure. That's actually a very specific kind of story to tell across an entire phase. It's the story of a world, multiple worlds, navigating the consequences of an order that has been removed. He Who Remains' sacred timeline was tyranny, but it was stable tyranny. What replaced it is freedom and chaos in roughly equal measure, and nobody asked if the people who inherited that freedom knew what to do with it. Dr. Doom knows what to do with it, or believes he does, which is, as we've established, not quite the same thing. There's something I find genuinely interesting about the timing of the Kang to Doom pivot, independent of the circumstances that caused it. The Kang storyline was built on the idea of a single overwhelming threat, one man, infinitely multiplied, whose power came from controlling time and therefore controlling everything. Doom's threat is structured differently. He doesn't want to conquer every timeline in a Kang-like empire. He wants to manage reality itself. There's a distinction there between domination and stewardship, even if the difference looks academic from the outside. And that distinction is, I think, what makes Doom a more interesting endpoint for this particular story than Kang would have been. Kang's threat was essentially numerical. The danger was not any individual Kang, but the fact that there were infinite of them, each as dangerous as the last, each with full knowledge of the multiverse and full willingness to use it. You couldn't defeat Kang. You could only delay the next Kang. It's a kind of despair built into the premise. Doom's threat is singular. There is one Victor Von Doom, and his power comes not from infinite multiplication, but from the combination of genius and sorcery, and will that exists only in him. He is not a problem you can't solve by defeating the instance in front of you. He's a problem you have to defeat once, completely, at whatever it costs, which is a different kind of dramatic structure, and arguably a more satisfying one for a story that needs a resolution rather than an endlessly deferred confrontation. The Kang premise, infinite variance, no final answer, might have worked in a very different kind of MCU, one willing to embrace the genuinely cyclical and unresolvable. Doom's premise is more classical, more tragedy-shaped, a man who is perhaps brilliant enough to deserve what he's reaching for, who is reaching for the wrong thing for the wrong reasons, who must be stopped by people who are not better than him in every way, just right where he is wrong. That's a story the MCU knows how to tell. It told it with Thanos in the end. The difference is that Thanos believed he was sacrificing himself, making the hard choice the universe wouldn't make for itself. Doom believes he is the gift. He believes the universe should be grateful. The hubris of Doom is not in thinking he can win. It's in thinking that winning is the same thing as being right. The TVA asked it. He who remains was the wrong answer. The Illuminati of Earth 838 asked it. Their collective wisdom was the wrong answer, and they paid for it. Strange asked it, implicitly, every time he reached for an extreme solution to a personal problem. Wanda asked it through the Darkhold, and the Darkhold's answer was, you, always you, whatever it costs. That was also the wrong answer. There's a version of the argument where Doom's answer is at least coherent. He's not operating on grief or desperation or institutional inertia. He has a theory of governance, however wrong-headed, however self-serving, and he has the capability to execute it. In a multiverse full of people who had good intentions and insufficient capability, or sufficient capability and insufficient wisdom, a person who has both is genuinely threatening. Not because he'll definitely win, but because the case for him won't be entirely dismissible. I've been thinking about the phrase glorious purpose while putting this together. It's the phrase Loki uses at the beginning of Season 1, the phrase he who remains his TVA was supposedly serving, and eventually the title of Loki Season 2's finale, where it gets reframed as something quieter and truer than either of those earlier uses. Loki's glorious purpose by the end is to hold the whole thing together, in silence, unknown, forever. Doom's glorious purpose, as he'd articulate it, is to rule the whole thing, visibly, loudly, as the acknowledged sovereign of whatever is left after the incursions are done. Those two visions of what it means to manage infinite reality are the poles between which Doomsday presumably sits. The self-effacing sacrifice and the grand imperial claim. Loki gave us one. Doom is going to give us the other. And the rest of the cast, Sam Wilson, Shuri, Reed Richards, the Thunderbolts, the X-Men arriving from their own fractured history, and everyone else confirmed for the film, are the people caught between those poles, trying to figure out which version of the world they actually want to live in. That's a good story. That's a genuinely good story. And I think the reason it took a while to see that it was being assembled is that good stories don't always look like good stories from the inside of them. Phase 4 looked, for a lot of its runtime, like chaos, like Marvel spinning plates and occasionally dropping them and hoping you'd forgiven the ones on the floor by the time they brought out the new ones. And maybe some of that was true. The production realities of the COVID era, the Kang situation, the sheer volume of content all at once, none of that was smooth. But underneath it, something was being built. The cracked multiverse, the named incursions, the Darkhold's consequences, the Fantastic Four's crossing, Loki holding the branches, all of it building a world in which Doctor Doom, the character who in the comics literally became God for a while and thought that was a reasonable thing to aspire to, makes sense as the next thing to arrive. I find myself genuinely excited about Doomsday in a way I haven't quite felt about the MCU since Endgame. Not because I know exactly what it's going to do, the plot is still largely under wraps at the time of this recording, but because the questions it's inherited from Phase 4 are good questions. Who manages the multiverse when the manager is gone? What do you do when the instability itself becomes the weapon? What kind of person has both the capability and the willingness to step into a power vacuum that large? And what do you do about that person once they've stepped in? There's one more small thing I want to mention before we start wrapping up, which is the question of whether any of this matters to the individual characters caught up in it. The cosmic and the personal always exist in tension in the best MCU content. The reason the Infinity War/Endgame structure worked as well as it did was that Thanos' universal death wish was always, simultaneously, about these specific people losing each other. Tony and Peter, Thor and his mother, Steve and what he'd given up. Doomsday is going to have to do that too. 3 universes colliding is an enormous structural event, but it will land only if the audience feels the weight of specific individuals inside that event. Reed Richards meeting Doctor Doom for the first time in this reality. The person who was once Tony Stark's face looking out from behind Victor Von Doom's mask. Sam Wilson, who chose the shield, having to figure out what the shield means when the threat isn't someone trying to take over the world, but someone who might genuinely make the world better, at a cost nobody agreed to pay. Those are the questions that Phase 4's quieter, more personal stories were, in their own way, preparing us for. The structural groundwork, incursions, branching timelines, chaos magic, the Celestials and the Void and the TVA is important. But the reason it matters is because it's happening to people. Real, fictional people that we've been spending time with. There's a particular kind of storytelling that only works at scale. The epic, the cosmic, the civilizational, and a different kind that only works up close. The best MCU films have always understood that you need both at once, and that the trick is in the movement between them. The moment in Infinity War that landed hardest was not the snap itself, which is enormous and abstract, but Peter Parker clinging to Tony Stark and saying he didn't want to go. One specific relationship, inside an event that erased half of all life in the universe. The intimacy of it was what made the scale bearable. Phase 4 was doing the same thing, in its slower, more distributed way. WandaVision's grief was intimate before it was cosmic. Loki's belonging was personal before it was multiversal. Sam Wilson's choice was political and moral and specific to who he is before it was a story about the symbol of Captain America. Phase 4 was charging the small batteries that the big story requires in order to land. And that's what I find most satisfying about it in retrospect. Not the mechanics, though the mechanics are interesting. Not even the Doomsday setup, though the setup is clever. But the fact that the people who are going to stand in the path of Victor Von Doom's ambitions are people we've watched find themselves. Watched fail and recover. Watched grieve and rebuild. They didn't arrive pre-assembled and confident. They were made by the stories Phase 4 told. That's what the best of Phase 4 understood, even in its messier moments. The multiverse is abstract. Wanda's grief wasn't. Loki's longing for belonging wasn't. Sam Wilson's specific history and specific dignity weren't. The human, or at least personal civic scale, is where the abstract stakes land. And Doctor Doom, when he arrives in this story, is going to be arriving in a world full of people who have already paid personal prices for the abstract instability he's planning to exploit. That's the real collision at the heart of the film, I think. Not just the collision of universes, but the collision between a man with infinite ambition and a world full of people who have already lost quite enough. Thank you. And it's a collision that Phase 4, in its entirety, the grief and the magic, and the bureaucracy, and the sacrifice, and the found families, and the broken institutions, and the celestial hand, still sitting in the Indian Ocean, has been quietly building toward all along. You don't always see the shape of a story until you're standing far enough from it. Phase 4, from here, has a shape, a good one. That's worth something at the end of a long night. There are a few things we haven't talked about tonight that probably deserve at least a passing mention, if only because they're threads that Doomsday may or may not pick up, and it's worth knowing they exist before December. The Guardians of the Galaxy, for instance. Volume 3 wrapped up their story in a way that felt genuinely final. The team dispersed, Rocket found a kind of peace. Peter Quill went back to Earth to reconnect with his grandfather. It was a lovely ending to a trilogy that was more emotionally coherent than most MCU franchises managed to be. But the Guardians, or some version of them, are confirmed for Doomsday, which means the ending of Volume 3 was not in fact an ending. It was a resting point. What brings them back isn't clear yet. The multiverse destabilization presumably affects deep space as much as it affects Earth. The quantum realm sits below all of it. The Celestials operate on a universal scale, and if universes are starting to collide, the effects wouldn't stop at Earth's atmosphere. The Guardians, with their experience of cosmic scale threats and their access to interstellar travel, are presumably positioned to see something coming that Earth-based heroes can't see from where they're standing. Nebula and Gamora's relationship, both alive in the primary timeline in ways that are complicated by the time travel and resurrection mechanics of Endgame, is another thread that hasn't been fully resolved. Gamora from 2014, who has no memory of the Guardians and their shared history, is somewhere in the universe. That's a dangling thread with genuine emotional weight, and it's the kind of thing that tends to resurface in big ensemble films. Thor. Love and Thunder is the Phase 4 entry I've been gentlest on throughout this video, and I want to be honest about why. It's a difficult film to incorporate into a serious analytical frame, because it's so committed to a comedic register that sometimes works, and sometimes, depending on your patience for that particular tone, doesn't. Gore the God Butcher is a genuinely interesting villain, a man who lost everything, whose faith in the gods was repaid with indifference, and who drew a logical if monstrous conclusion from that betrayal. But the film's tone sometimes undercuts the weight of that premise. What Love and Thunder does contribute to the Doomsday picture is primarily in its character work. Thor becoming a father figure to Gore's daughter Love is a significant development for a character who has been defined since his first film by the question of whether he's actually worthy of the responsibility he's been handed. The love he demonstrates here, patient, genuine, not contingent on being recognised for it, is the character at his best. And that version of Thor, carrying a new purpose rather than just a hammer, is presumably the one who shows up in Doomsday, saying he's never been more afraid of an enemy. The Eternals thread is the open one I keep returning to. Arishem's judgment hasn't landed. The celestial hand is still there. The surviving Eternals, Cersei, Makari, Druig, Kingo, Karun, are presumably still somewhere in Arishem's custody, or returned from it, or scattered. The story of humanity being a species that destroyed one celestial to survive is presumably not a story Arishem is finished with. In a Doomsday context, celestials, beings who literally create suns and seed planets and operate on geological timescales, are an interesting wild card. If universes are colliding and reality is destabilizing, what do the Celestials do? Do they care? Does the cosmic infrastructure they maintain, the machinery of the universe's reproductive cycle, have anything to say about Incursions? Could Doom have a plan that involves or accounts for Celestials in some way that the heroes don't? I don't have answers to these questions, but they're the kind of questions that the Eternals thread exists to eventually address. And Doomsday feels like the right scale for them to resurface. Then there's the matter of Loki. Loki is holding the multiverse together at the end of time. He's been doing this presumably since the end of Loki Season 2, which places him as an ongoing, active force in the story of the multiverse, even as he's invisible to the other characters. The question of whether that situation is sustainable, whether someone can discover and exploit it, whether Doom could reach the end of time and interfere with the one thing that's keeping all the branches intact, these feel like very live possibilities for the story. The character can't stay in that chair forever, narratively. Tom Hiddleston has been part of the MCU since 2011, and Loki's arc is one of its most complete. The Season 2 ending is lovely precisely because It doesn't demand anything more. But if Doomsday is the story of everything breaking, then the thing holding it together, Loki, alone at the end of time, is part of what can break. That's either a very dark thought or a structurally interesting one, or most likely both. There's also America Chavez, confirmed for Doomsday, who has spent her time at Kamar-Taj learning to control powers that can physically punch holes between universes. She's been training, she's been building towards something, and in a story about universes colliding, a person who can punch portals between them, and who now, presumably, has some degree of control over that ability, is either a decisive weapon or an enormous liability, depending on who's trying to use her for what. In the comic's Secret Wars structure, the ability to travel between universes at will is the most valuable power anyone can have. The heroes who survive the Incursion event and still have access to the multiverse are the ones who have any chance of responding to what Doom builds. America Chavez's development through the MCU, from a terrified teenager with uncontrolled powers to presumably a young sorcerer with the beginning of mastery over the multiverse itself, is the arc of someone being prepared for exactly this moment. That's the thing about all of this, actually. When you look at Phase 4 with Doomsday as the destination, the character development is as important as the structural groundwork. Every hero who found their footing, Sam Wilson accepting the shield, Shuri finding something to live for in grief, Kamala Khan becoming Miss Marvel, and reaching out to Kate Bishop and beginning to assemble the next generation, America Chavez learning to control herself, is being positioned for a specific role in the story that follows. The MCU has always worked this way. The original Iron Man, in retrospect, was building toward an ensemble that took years to assemble. The difference now is that the ensemble is enormous, 3 separate universes worth of characters, and the question of how to use that scale without losing the individual stories inside it is the thing Doomsday will have to answer. I think it can. The Russo brothers, with the Infinity War/Endgame structure as their credential, have demonstrated that they know how to manage a cast of 40 at a story level without losing the personal stakes. The challenge is greater now. More characters, more universes, the specific complication of introducing the X-Men and the Fantastic Four alongside the existing MCU roster, but the foundation is solid. And perhaps most importantly, the questions Phase 4 left open are good questions. Not loose ends left by accident, but deliberate uncertainties that a story worth telling will eventually need to address. The celestial judgment, Loki's eternal solitude, America Chavez's full potential, the child growing inside Sue Storm, the adamantium in the world's infrastructure, the void full of pruned realities managed by whatever Cassandra Nova has become in the aftermath of the film. These are not the loose threads of a franchise that lost the plot. They're the hanging questions of a story that knows it has more to say. That's what Phase 4 was, I think, when you stand back far enough to see the whole thing. Not the story of a phase that couldn't figure out its direction. The story of a multiverse finding out, piece by piece, what it means to be infinite and what it costs. So that's Phase 4, or rather, that's Phase 4 seen from a particular angle, with a particular light. There are other readings, other threads you could follow, other ways of making sense of those years of content. This is the one that makes most sense to me right now, in this moment, knowing what's coming. The branched multiverse, the named incursions, the cracked institutions, the personal costs of reality bending. The Fantastic Four arriving with their particular knowledge of what happens when a universe starts to fail. A man in a metal mask, watching all of it from somewhere, patient, with a plan that requires every one of those cracks to already exist before he can use them. It's a better story than it looked like from the inside of it. There's something I find genuinely comforting about that, actually. And I'm aware that comforting is a slightly unusual word for a discussion of cosmic catastrophe and multiversal collapse. But there's a particular kind of reassurance in discovering that something you thought was scattered and confused was actually building towards something. Not perfect. Nothing in Phase 4 was perfect, and I don't think anyone would claim otherwise, but purposeful. Underneath the messiness, there was a direction, and the direction is a story about what it means to keep going in a world without the people who used to hold it together. Tony Stark and Steve Rogers and Natasha Romanoff are gone. The original Avengers, the people who were the backbone of the MCU for a decade, are gone, or transformed, or retired. What Phase 4 was building, alongside all the multiverse mechanics, was the answer to the question of who comes next. Sam Wilson, Shuri, Yelena, Kamala, America, the Fantastic Four, even the X-Men, arriving from their own complicated history into a world that doesn't know them yet. The transition generation, the people who didn't ask for this, who've been doing their best in a world that was already complicated before the multiverse branched, who are now going to have to deal with Doctor Doom. I think they'll manage. I also think Doom is going to be a genuinely worthy adversary for them, and that the combination of RDJ's particular energy, all that charisma, all that intelligence, all that something slightly dangerous underneath the charm, with the character of Victor Von Doom, is going to be one of the more interesting things the MCU has produced. It's a specific kind of performance challenge. Play a man who might not be wrong, inside a story that needs you to be the villain. Make the audience uncomfortable rather than simply satisfied when he's defeated. If they pull that off, Doomsday will have earned its place in the sequence. And sitting here, with Phase 4 behind us, and December ahead of us, I think there's a reasonable case that they will. The foundations are there. The questions are good. The people who are going to stand in the path of whatever Doom intends are, by now, people worth standing behind. For now, though, we've been at this for a while, and the hour is whatever it is where you are. There's no rush. The celestial hand is still in the Indian Ocean, because some things don't resolve themselves on your schedule. Loki is at the end of time, holding the branches in his hands, and he's not letting go. The multiverse is branched and vast and full of people living their lives in realities that technically shouldn't be allowed to exist. And somewhere in all of that, Victor Von Doom is patient, which at this hour seems like a reasonable quality to aspire to. There are other videos in the pipeline. The X-Men's MCU history is its own enormous thread that deserves its own time, and the question of where the Secret Wars comic storyline actually lines up with what the MCU seems to be building is something I want to dig into